The Paprika Rebels, Matthew Didymus. Chapter 1, The Dream of an Horse. Chapter 2, Albinus Hog and Cincinnatus Crow. Chapter 3, The Goulash. Chapter 4, Aunt Dornia and Hyperjornia. Chapter 1, The Dream of an Horse. Although his sister, Bjork, didn't kill anyone, for long years ago, to the day, Bjorn Lefty Armwell took the fall for robbery murder. She was a smart little filly, and she knew the track. Lefty had recently been transferred from Wakefield to Millbank Prison. He did indeed look guilty on account of the job war said to be done by a one-armed man, and Bjorn had lost one of his hands as a lad in a terrible hunting accident amongst the birch trees with his sister. For his unproved crimes, he was sentenced to a total of 20 years. In Millbank Prison there was, apart from everything else one would think to find in a prison, an horse, chestnut brown and black, who was the first thing of particular interest to Lefty. For Lefty saw in the horses eyed the same flash of freedom burning in his own. He asked one of his brother convicts what the horse's name was. London Jack, said brother convict. There's tea name would they give me. Hi, Lefty. Looks like a Londoner. Lefty couldn't just stand there while in horse war in captivity. It was as bad as if there were a unicorn in the prisoner yard. In his bunk, he began to devise a plan for getting London Jack back to London, or wherever he was from. And though his logic was the logic of a horse, which is the logic of a dream, he acted to that end. A few days later, Lefty approached a guard. Sir, Lefty, may I ask you something? Go ahead, the guard said with annoyance. May I speak with the horse, sir? Lefty. You what? Guard. Well, see, we had one when I was a lad, and I was a good lad, only recently fell into hard times. You're in here to be punished, guard. True enough, sir, Lefty, but only for a time. But as time is, and like the great whales of the sea, we must come up for air, sir. Aye, go ahead, guard, for a minute, and don't touch it. If it moves from you, just get back to your work. Don't need you disturbing any of the decent animals. You just mind the pigs. Oh, I will, sir. I will, Lefty. He walked over to the horse and told him how he had a plan to escape. You ain't claustrophobic, are you? It's a small job, even for a man. London Jack subtly shook his head no. Good. Well, say no more, Lefty. I shall call upon you by and by. But by and by is more easily said. Lefty was, initially, given a good job in the library because of his background as a teacher of mathematics, but that did not suit his ends. His was not to bide his time, his was to break free. And so, he but bent and broke a few rules. Nothing malicious, just small contraband infractions. Walking out of turn, talking out of line. Small enough altercations so that the guards would only hold it jokingly against him and remind him he does not have the cash to afford all the rights he took for granted on the outside. This went until the point what others took as precaution, he took as ambition. The warden was wont to have an entire pack of biscuit custard creams with his daily coffee. The guard set up Lefty with his sort of last chance. But the coffee decanter came without the coffee and the dish without the creams. Lefty was dragged out of the warden's water closet, spitting biscuit crumbs out in protest of his innocence. Get your hands off me, he protested. I only got one arm to defend myself. The guards left him alone for 4 days and came back after he had exhausted himself, sleeping for 20 minutes at a time on the concrete floor. His whole body ached. I'm just a man and all men are sinners, I suppose, was Lefty's only remark when they broke him down in interrogation. Throughout, Lefty had taken far too much of their time using objections to defend his pride rather than his innocence. But the warden didn't take any leniency with the prescribed punishments. He lost his trusty job and was sent with boots onto the farm. They made him shovel behind the pigs, but he was now close enough to the horse to let him know what he was thinking. In the abiding time, he had found his first plan of escape through a charmless old git named Waleed Fred. According to Waleed Fred, the whole inside of the prison was hollow. It looked like a solid postmodern brutalist fortress, but it was really like a myriad of cardboard boxes placed together. The entrance points were simple, but they were all on the guard side. Their locker rooms had the maintenance entrance for accessing behind all the pipes. Lefty thought if he was going to get caught trying to escape, it might be helpful to have the horse. If indeed he was caught, he would just plead insanity, saying, I wanted the horse to have a safe shower. The Lord alone knows what would happen to a horse in a prisoner's shower. It was a solution, but really it was just a possible move. As in chess, it is a mistake to make a move simply because it has valid points. One must press the reality of the moment and see if there is a better move, pressing so hard in one's mind as to bend time. The only other thing that came to mind was literally a brick wall. In one of the passages from the library, there is an old doorway that has been sealed up with bricks. It's an old delivery close. He had dismissed it. How long would it take to knock it down? Would it immediately cause an alarum? Where did it lead? The sewers led to the river. The sewers were safe, apart from the woolly rats. There might be bars or something, but he would have some metal of his own. But then he thought, well, a 9-pound hammer is as easily bargained for as a crowbar. It just costs more cigarettes. For days and days, he started manifesting the plan of knocking down a brick wall. Like a boxer going for the heavyweight championship, all he could see was bricks and tearing them down. Then shortly after March, Lefty had to report to the guards that the pig crap was not looking as good as it used to. Not that it ever looked great, but it was much worse than before. Something foul had gotten into them. Did you poison these pigs, Lefty? Guard. Absolutely impossible, sir, Lefty. We eat from the same trough. The veterinarian came down and said the pigs had a certain type of swine flu, not fit to be eaten, and the only thing to do was dispose of them. This was most unfortunate, since the only reason they had a few pigs was to slaughter them for Easter ham. What do we do for Easter this year, sir? Lefty asked. We'll do what we did 12 years ago when the same thing happened. Guard. What was that, sir? Lefty. We ate the horse, Guard said, laughing. The prisoners, that is. That gave Lefty a deadline. He had to get the horse out of there. He thought about God working through him. That flash in yard between their eyes was God. Although he was no longer a religious man, he still prayed from time to time. During the sleeplessness of that night, he muttered a prayer. God, I know you're using me to save this horse. I don't know what great plans you have for him, but if you would only see clear to helping me, I'll get him out. On that fateful day, Holy Thursday night, Through the sewers they ran. But Lefty and London Jack were almost immediately caught. London Jack had a rope tied tightly around his neck, like an umbilical cord. Lefty locked to a rail, but the guard only locked his prosthetic hand to the rail, and Lefty saw his opportunity. He chewed off his wooden hand at the wrist. Then, after Lefty undid his umbilical cord rope, London Jack and him ran. Release the 4 angels who are bound at the great Euphrates. It SAS in the book of Revelations, Lefty said, driving the rudder with his homemade hook. And the heads of the horses were as lions. The lockkeepers, the towns the stretch of canals. London Jack looked at them all with his handsome face and soft, beautiful eyes. Under each bridge there'd be some birds, and London Jack would watch them flutter their wings. Each lockkeeper got the same from Lefty. Aye, just a load of pigs. There's no toll on pigs, the lockkeeper would say. Pig iron, that is, good sir. Iron pigs, as it were, sir, Lefty would say and laugh. But it was more than pig iron. They were secretly transferring church bells, so they were not dismantled by the government. The current prime minister had all but outlawed the use of church bells and declared the government could confiscate them at will. A few brave churches rang their bells in defiance, but they were seized upon and damaged. Some of them were cemented up and later fell through the belfry. Most churches began to leave them silent, but still they could be subject to being turned over by the authorities to the authorities. The safe thing was to smuggle them to the islands for now. For their troubles, they were promised a ticket to Canada. Remember those woolly rats, London Jack? Thought we'd never dig our way out before they got us. Slowed us down mightily, but God was there digging with us, and don't deny it. We couldn't have moved that much earth, just a man and a horse. One door to freedom, and it's covered to the pecker in dirt and mud, and I don't want to know what else, but behind it was the beautiful sewer of freedom. London Jack's large, soft eyes lazily watched the waters. His large brown muscles brought the barge down the road. He thought how they'd been on the river ever since the day they escaped. Just a couple of Mexicans turned God-fearing seafaring men. Everything was a rat at one time, Lefty said. A man, a dog, a whale. Even the horse himself was a rat, they say. London Jack shook his head disagreeably and began looking to the rolling hills, the grass, and the wildflowers. Yes, even horses wore rats. But now you have the heads of lions. The two kept the steady pace of the day in silence most of the time, but when it was time for some conversation, Lefty led the discourse. London Jack would simply give body language expressions and sighs. Few times he laughed, though he would more oft crack a smile, often rolling his large eyes and twitching his ears. Old lion-headed London Jack went down the towpath. He looked at the river, and then his hooves. He'd have to change his hooves for fins, he would. And then he looked at the man. Well, the man was like every other beast, except for his will. Would London Jack trade Jesus 4 ands? Hard telling. They made domino tiles from donkey hooves. Been donkey years since London Jack saw his Trinity. All right, Lefty said. Tunnel. The tunnel was coming, and so London Jack came down to the boat. The TWA laid down to walk the boat through by the stone roof of the tunnel. 6 legs took the boat through where only a pinpoint of light guided them. London Jack was indeed claustrophobic, but he endured. Trinity was his second owner. Long ago in West Africa, a Fulani prince had come with his family to propose marriage to Trinity when she was but a teenager, for he had seen her in the marketplace with her mother as his caravan drove through. He had sent his servants to find where she lived and proceeded to gather gifts for her. There were many gifts of fabric, dates, plantains, and spices, and, ultimately, a newborn horse, who was there to symbolize how their love would grow. But Trinity's father dismissed the marriage outright. The sad prince insisted that they keep all the gifts to spare him grief and the shame of returning with the gifts. That way, over time, the story would depart of its accord and not be so suddenly announced. Her father saw the horse and said to Trinity, "The only one with skinnier legs than that horse is you." Trinity called him Nothing Day Happen because he looked so helpless, but she soon changed his name to Laddie for the family's sake. Still, she herself referred to him as Nothing Day Happen. By the time she left home for boarding school, she also had a dog named Tawny and a chicken named Clue, who she kept for eggs and distributed them to children in her village. They would call her Mam and Egg, and she loved to hear them laugh as they ran. She would call to them, "If you break your egg, don't come crying to me." At this time, she lived in the south and her family still lived in the north. When she began university, Nothing Day Happen was used to go to surrounding towns. But Trinity walked to church on Sundays. She worshipped hours before she ever stepped into the church. Through prayer and fasting, she woke early at 3 a.m. and prayed in bed. Then she prayed all through getting up and getting ready. Under the stars, she moved to warm her body from the chill. Usually, she left at sunrise after feeding Tawny and Clue, and Nothing Day Happened. Trinity loved the red sun in the morning shining like the most sacred heart of Jesus. Sometimes she stayed in church until evening to see the red sun again as she got a ride home on a motorbike. Her beauty turned many heads as she went and returned. London Jack's large eyes flashed with tears thinking about Trinity. She had cared for him when he was young and made him strong. Now he had to work for his living, but he supposed that is the way of most living things. He was thankful to Lefty for getting him out of prison, and from getting eaten by the prisoners on Easter Day. Lefty also promised to take care of him when they got to Canada. Was that going to be his land of rest? Wasn't it just farther away from his past? While Trinity was enrolled in high school, she began the first of her professional endeavors as a beauty pageant contestant. She ran in 6 beauty pageants, 5 in Nigeria and 1 in Ghana. She finished runner-up in 5 and Miss Congeniality in 1. She was the true winner since the only women who took the crown were relatives to the sponsors of the pageant. All the while she was performing, she was making lasting contact with many of these businesses that either sponsored the events or managed the contestants. Each night, she wrote detailed notes on all the people she met. During these times, her pets were looked after by neighbors as she went on one of her contests. But on the last one in Ghana, when she came back, all her animals were gone. Her neighbors had turned wicked and decided to eat Clue. As she was being taken to a stump, the place of her execution, Twani ran up and bit the man on the hand. Twani tried to bite them again as they were taking Clue. Clue was able to break free and flew a short distance before running into the bush. Twani, they locked him in with a fenced pen and were sure to get a gun. He instantly began to dig and got himself out. Twani began to run towards where Nothing Day Happen was tied in the barn. But Nothing Day Happen told him he was tied up and just to run away. And if not for a shot from a shotgun that just missed Twani, he would have figured out a way to free Nothing Day Happen. That night, Nothing Day Happen was taken into town where he was sold to a British man who took him back to London. This man donated him to the local police, but as they had no use for him, they put him out at a prison to plow a few hedgerows. London Jack didn't mind prison in the least. That was the case, at first, that is, but things change when you suddenly become an item on the cafeteria's menu. Ever since they got out, London Jack spent his days reading through the newspapers that passed by in the streets and collected under bridges. Lefty knew he liked the paper and kept him up to date on all things domestic and foreign. So, all the while as he thought about Trinity, he put her into the living day and wondered what she would think about these things. He imagined she must be a queen somewhere and that Twani had found her and they lived together in the palace. He knew she would go on to do such great things. He thought about the newspapers that blew in the streets. Maybe he'd see her picture on one day. Order and procedure, Queen Trinity read aloud. Twani, the UK Parliament is planning to control the minds of its citizens. These are the words of PM Albinus Hogg. It's been repeated. The press is tricking the newspaper reading public into thinking everything is going well. Hogg has his sinister agenda. His latest provision passed. It harkened back to the past. The foggy yesteryears of our forebears that continue to befog the minds of our tomorrows. The Paprika tariffs. All that was done to celebrate what they called Britannia and established by secret orders during their ungodly moon rituals in sequestered nooks in the moors of York. And the success of the realm was as though cheering for a great champion. All the vendors selling spice had had their windows broken in. Pre-cooked meals were sent to all the state-owned schools. Only religious schools could cook for themselves. The country had been nationalized. This man, Crow Twani. I feel his family history has something to do with it. There is certainly a mineral named Britannium. I saw it in the file. Is it used for mind control? Why would that be? It must be a sedative. But I suppose it enables their other tactics. Those woolly rats. But we got out, by God. And then Good Friday morn. Lefty's voice echoed down the tunnel. I had underestimated how unique a man escaping with a horse would be, but we both took our chances through that sewer. Then we took a boat. This here boat, by George. Painted it up over the years. A nice river boat for the canals. London Jack wept. Can't say just one of us broke the ice to the pole, Lefty. No, it takes 2. I like me Peter Abelard. Against Augustine's original sin, do justice. Love kindness. Walk humbly with your God. They're all lawyers of the law now. I too may have a wife and child, said St. Francis. That's good enough for me. Back when we had an empire, a man might have a half-dozen sons he didn't know. Nowadays, it's as few as 1 or 2. London Jack smiled. Chapter 2. Albinus Hogg and Cincinnatus Crow. Out of the undergrowth, PM Albinus Hogg's conservative government had come back to win the general election. His party was called the Forthright Party. PM Hogg had used one of his underlings in the conservative government to put forth a bill that Labour had tried to pass years earlier. The bill was meant to help bring about renovations to the historical districts of the towns of Britain. Hogg wanted to take the money and rebuild the original market streets, complete with gallows and stocks. The Conservatives were challenged by a Scottish MP of the SNP shortly after they introduced an amendment to the bill to portion out 15 meters of rope to each town receiving gallows. Era, why would this provision need to be codified? MP Thurston Hurlston Johnton asked. Surplus, Hogg. Can you really stand there straight-faced and dismiss the fears of all these people with a word? MP Thurston Hurlston Johnton asked. It costs His Majesty's government more to hold onto this rope than to give it away, Hogg said defiantly. It has helped the ropery, who make up more than 0.02% of our GDP. I know it seems small to you, but the Conservative government wants to help everyone. Surplus, cried Johnton. It's strategic. It's terrorism. It's portioned fairly, Hogg said. GIE it to your MPs to eat 15 meters each. Albinus Hogg immediately went to work, yet again, on what was a long and used scheme by both sides of the government. It had been found in the early 20th century that there was a mineral, chalk-like, that was found in a couple of coastal areas near the Yorkshire moors, as well as in a few places in Wales. The deposits in Wales could be significantly higher, but it would mean razing the mountains to nothing. PM Hogg had thought he could influence the Welsh later in his term to do just that, but for now he could rely on the mines in the north. He fortunately had gone to school with a man whose family had been disgraced due to the mines. The man's name was Crow, Cincinnatus Crow, and his name was infamous due to his grandfather. Under the auspices of Cornelius Cornwallis Crow, the mines saw their last good days. But in his waning years, early in this century, the Crows had begun silting up the mouth of the river with mining. The old Crow had silted the river so badly that it had long since made the former port town of Corby sat miles inland and, consequently, without its port. Escarpment after escarpment crumbled from the hollowing out of the hills and the dynamite blasts. By the time of his son, the antiquarian, Sir Colton Crow, the mines were dwindling. He spent the family fortune buying back his family's title from the government. He was the father of Cincinnatus Crow, who now was the last Crow of the manor. In the bygone days of ages past, Cincinnatus would constantly hear about the family history from his father. It all dates back to Laurentia, Baltica, and Avalonia. Orogeny, they call it. The Crow name once struck fear into the common man. By the way the Crow flies. He pounded on the table with his fist. Some of the pewter fell over, and Mr. Brunton, the butler, set it upright. That's the way this country used to be. Straight to the heart of each matter. They relieved our titles for a time, but I've spent the entire treasury of the town just to get back what they took from us. Isn't that right, Cincinnatus? Most veritable, father, Cincinnatus said. Yes. Through gross negligence to safety and no concern for either animal or human life, the Crows were able to expand the mines, and so there was an increase to dynamiting of the lands. The river became murky with pollution, and then seemed to run away, changing its path. The Corby River was once a beautiful estuary, but the mudlands had only muddy fish and oysters and clams that the people couldn't eat on account of the pollution, though try they did. The change of the river swept across the field of Leaf Jarvison and caused considerable damage to several other farms. Jarvison's barn was swept out to the sea. It warshed away his milk cow, warshed away his sheep, warshed away his chicken coop, and, finally, warshed away his corn crib, and so he swore his revenge. He passed the oath to his 4 sons, Lowell, Marwell, Thomas, and Oscar. The town of Corby was no longer a port. The change in the river had left the town's shipyard had become obsolete, with the rotting carcasses of ships rotting in the once illustrious harbor. From hence these mudlands was called Crow's Bay, attaching their name to failure. Crow Manor sat perched for 1,000 years on the hill, that dark and lowering hill. Ancient stones that sat there since time ever were quarried 1,000 years ago and constructed into this sinister-looking hall. The garden, the lime walk, were all dirt and weeds, overgrown with overgrowth and undergrowth sprawling all over the place. There were no longer vast amounts of servants, just one simple butler, Brunton, and a housekeeper, Mrs. Brunton. Mr. Brunton had been there since he was a lad. Between the two they covered all the duties of the manor. We need the mines opened, Hogg. But the people won't work in them, Crow. We have that covered, Hogg. We are bringing in some workers. I thought your government was against migrant workers, Crow. Ostensibly, yes, Hogg said, but we have to be flexible. Where are they from? Crow asked. And Dornia, Hogg. You don't mean. Crow. Precisely, Hogg, penguins. But they're Stalinists, Crow said. Concessions, said Hogg in the same casual manner he had done when questioned at the Parliament. Crow reticently put the penguins to work in his mines. Due to their number, they were able to work the operation 24 hours a day. They were Stalinists, but that was on account of the region they lived in. Antjornia was an old Soviet scientific exploration camp that had about 1,001 meter by 1 meter steel signs with etchings of Joseph Stalin on all of them. And as the penguins huddled around these for warmth, they grew to have the same alleged politics of the man. Soon after they began working, they wore out the old equipment, but Hogg had already ordered larger and better equipment from the National Implements Yard. When the new mining equipment arrived through Corby, the town was abuzz. The townspeople were indolent. None of them wanted to work these mines, but they assumed the penguins were well compensated. The mining, drilling, and dynamiting echoed through town, and the townspeople turned their heads to the hills and muttered, "Aye, what's all this then, eh?" The town quickly was placed under a boil notice, but it was lifted after it was shown that boiling the water only exacerbated the problems by making the contaminant airborne. Crow wanted nothing to do with the mining. It had been quiet in his time. The townspeople held disdain for him, but it was silent disdain on account of his inactivity. He had pushed for Hogg to give him an hour, the honor as the premier poet of Yorkshire, but it had since gone unfulfilled. He fancied himself the poet laureate of the country and paid the newspapers anywhere from 10 to 15 pounds per poem to put him in. He wrote prophecy unto himself under the influence of Britannia. During the moon fetes he held in his gardens, he would recite his poetry. Incidentally, he was not invited to the fraternities that haunted the nearby moors doing similar distasteful things under the moon. Crow went down to a place called the Kubrick Beaches. He had an affinity towards the moon. He reminisced the moons of the past. Oh, the moon that shone on Euclid, he wrote in one of his more palatable poems. But one had to disagree with the contents in one's stomach to put any weight upon the moons of the past. If the days of the moon were its years, he would never enter his 30s. Crow called the moon, "Old man, father, father moon, my father." And indeed his father was on the moon. Father Moon? Is there a pharaoh's tomb on the moon? Today, there are many pharaohs' tombs on the moon. They were taken there a half century ago by a group of billionaires, and his father had also buried himself in the midst of these men. Crow lived in the poetry he created. Whatever he wrote, he could choose to believe. He, as though it were endearing, would tell Hogg all about his father leaving his lunar crypt to do some mining on the moon. As the months went on, and Britannium was being mined, Hogg put up with all the calling. Hogg's agenda was steamrolling ahead. The people everywhere were eating more Britannium. The food was at enriched levels, with a few places on the map given dangerously high amounts. Magistrates and court officials began to line up to accept Britannium for their districts because they were directly tied to public funding. Britannium was an additive that no food could be left without. It was so deep into the food supply that no diet could avoid it. The hippie communists who ate only cabbage were safe for a while, but soon they were given crates of government tea with Britannium laced in it. Hogg started by making sure anyone on benefits could only have food with Britannium. It affected some people powerfully. Others only took the turn, they called it, after a month of eating this food. But for some people, it didn't seem to affect them. So, as the months went by, Hogg's plans in many ways were going better than expected in most areas, but underwhelming in others. His avid supporters saw every strong move Hogg made as an extension of their fist. They were violent. That was the only politics they had. They gladly punched the earth in the face over and over. King AI was going to give a speech at Parliament, and this coincided with naming a new poet laureate after the late death of John Benson, but it was postponed out of recognition of the greatness of the shadow of the man. Hogg had promised it to Crow in exchange for complete use of his mining, but he asked Crow to forgive him this year. This was indeed devastating since Crow had become uneasy with the Penguins and the town. He needed the security. He needed a legacy. He'd be in league with Tennyson. The Penguins were quietly unionizing. Crow was not a man or steel. He was hardly a man at all. He became erratic. The only thing that was a temporaneous calm to him was Britannium, and so he quickly became addicted to it. He put spoonfuls of it into his milk. Then he'd go off to the Kubrick beaches and found himself composing another poem about the moon. The glee in his eyes became terrifying. Chapter 3. The Goulash. In the humble town of Pigsley, while Xenora played with their cats, Arius and Dolly, Marius made his infamous goulash, perfecting his craft or mischief. The two have been together for 7 happy years together, and have had the cats together for the better part of the decade. Xenora had forgiven his every fault, but still he continued to miss the mark from time to time. He never let anything keep him down and would get up and walk further, soldiering on the best he could. Marius has a different theory on the matter entirely. In his view on the matter, their marriage began that first Christmas holiday when they had taken the holy gifts up to the altar at St. Mirren's Christmas Eve, and then, on Boxing Day, started a cruise, let's say, of the inland canals of Scotland, which Mrs. Xenora Webb called the worst experience of her life, a slow trip to nowhere, an endless piddle down the dirty pish freezing watercourses, easily the most tiresome and ridiculous thing I've ever had the displeasure to endure, although she admitted the northern coast was all right. But Marius thought those nights were nights for revelers. It was in those days Xenora had taught him about paprika, and still in these days as he added more paprika to the sizzling beef and onions, tomatoes and garlic, all the while the macaroni pasta was on boil. He remembered the days they went to the shops together, and he showed her the old ones. Amongst the coins of her change, the days they'd order fish and chips with curry, living across from the corner of a necropolis, where an apple tree hung its fruit over the 8-foot wall, over those on the sidewalk. They sat at the train or bus station together, everything together, like a best friend joined at the hip. Adventuring the Hyperjornia when, in those days, there weren't even Christianity up there yet. Or staring out of their east window together to see the shadows drag on the walls that wrapped around the necropolis in the east, and the wind cry down the street as a couple of apples fell and bruised themselves. The world outside had changed into a desperate wasteland. The wars of the Dornia were ever raging, and the narwhals and great whales fought men and met to fight for their lives in the warming waters and sharp rocks. The great seals and sea lions, the walruses all fighting man for the newest land and lanes. The north has become the new Silk Road. The mice and the frogs had not been able to determine Europe in either the first or second 10 Years' War, and now were thinking of attacking each other once again. What's in the paper? Marius asked. Another 300% tariff on paprika, Xenora said. Traitors. It's treason. Treason. Marius. All right, love, if wishing makes it so, Xenora. It's times like this I saw coming, Marius. I have to admit, you did, Xenora. It's that hog, it is Marius. Yes, dear Xenora. Packing away all the spices through the years. It's illegal to hoard it now, you know? It's illegal to give out. I'm an outlaw, my love. An outlaw, Marius said, perturbed, and began shaking his hands to his side. They're going to get me locked up, say. Those grocers will spill any secret. They've been waiting for the day to ruin me. Now, dearie, that kind of thinking won't get you anywhere, Xenora. There's not a soul who would remember, because I had made you stop buying so much so many years ago. Most of it you brought out of the country. Had to smuggle it, didn't you? Love, Marius. If you were on your own, Xenora, they'd come knocking on your door first thing. Aye, there it is, but they still might. What are we to do with all the spice? Marius. Give it away, Zaynora. That's illegal, Marius. No one is supposed to have it, love. It's going to be impossible. Throw it in the bin, Zaynora. Good heavens, never. Marius. Then start putting extra spice in the parish food, Zaynora. The idea clicked in Marius' head. He would simply cook more goulash and give away the spice in his food. He kissed his wife for being his guiding light. He had taken over full duties for the cafeteria at Our Lady of Succor after the Candlemas. The death of the pastor's sister, Sister Rosetta, had caused an undeniable rift at the cafeteria, where she had served the Lord for 38 years, but Marius was the first to volunteer. Though he had taken over somewhat reluctantly on account of he basically had 5 meals he knew how to cook: goulash, traditional Hungarian goulash, chicken goulash, vegetarian goulash, and fish goulash for Lenten Fridays. The second week was an exact copy of the first week. The third was a copy of the second, and so on. Then, upon Zaynora's advice, he began to overspice the goulash. At first, the students seemed like they couldn't handle the change, but it woke them up like a kick to the eye. Zaynora now only seldom took upon her cape and went outside in her capacity as a private detective. She had recently proven a certain glazer of murder, which appeared in the tale so-called the jesting glazer, who, let's say, dropped a large pane of glass on someone he didn't like on purpose just as they were passing underneath. Zaynora had a mouth none of her adversaries could withstand nor contradict. She also had her doubts upon this whole hitherto mentioned Bell enterprise her husband had casted both their lots into. Arius was resting upon her chest for the afternoon, but she got up early. He was her teddy bear, but he wasn't afraid to show his disappointment whenever she started to get ready to go out. Arius had consoled his father on the failure that was fish goulash last Friday, and was now expecting a little more attention from his mother. It's only for a few hours, Buba, to check on Daddy, she said, easing his pains. Dolly was the baby girl of the family. Whenever Zaynora would baby talk Arius, Dolly was quick on the scene to correct the error and insist she was the only baby in the family. So Zaynora would say, "Who's my baby girl?" Such a pretty girl. She came to her husband's aid. But when Zaynora came to help him cook and offered a few new dishes, taking a break from her private practice of the detection of crimes, she directed him where to go and was his spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical guide. She began to see his true world as one seeing someone through the lens of the cross of Jesus. It was concluded that he was better fitted than anyone else to serve food from a trough, or as Nora called him, the premier ladler. He had a big dipper and a little dipper to portion out to the students, and was all smiles at his work with his wife by his side. They called him the Great Bear. Churchyard Graves. After Zaynora studied the stomachs of all those who attended the church for lunch, the children of Our Lady of Succor began to remark their parents were too lazy to do the housework. Every house had fallen into disrepair, so it seemed, under Britannia. But the children were wide awake and aware of the things going on in the world. Zaynora and Marius continued to work completely unaware that they were no less than co-insurers of no less than a culinary revolution. They were the Paprika Rebels. He read the tombstones and thought about the bygone people from ages past. Although he didn't think death itself was romantic, but a life well lived. And if you had to die like that, he had given his best years to the best woman he had ever met. And for the world, she only asks his all, and he gladly gave his all, for all was all he had to give her. She was continually beside him all these years, but he so entirely and tenderly loved her. And the world asked a lot of him in his best years, and Zaynora always appreciated that. He was a wounded man in many ways, tender-hearted and easily upset. Usually, a nap could cure just about anything. Arius was the same way, and they liked to take their naps together at times. He walked through the old churchyard graveyard and said, "These 2 graves are big enough for a horse." That night he seemed perturbed. Zaynora was worried about him because he sometimes, well, he spoke of a steamboat. This Bell fiasco was apparently about to preclude from however far in the mix it already was. Marius had been greatly afeared of what the government was doing in the country to immigrants. He knew Zaynora was thinking about his actions, that things were not adding up. But he was not the best with coming out with the truth. If cornered, he would expose all. He had set his mind to going down to the river that night to pour out all his spices. As he fumbled around the pantry, Zaynora cornered him in a conversation. "Dear, what is the spell caper you alluded to?" "Oh, that, dear. The church took down its bells. I'm supposed to take them down the river and find this man with his horse. Seems like a lot of trouble. Well, it's a worthwhile job, you see. I could just about name my price." "How much did you ask for?" "Canada." "You what?" "And a horse, apparently. When I asked for Canada, the man said I had to take his horse with me. He thought it'd be a better life for him if I took him there. Dear, I'm going to pack a bag, take the cats." "It's true, love." Marius stormed. "And just tonight I was going to the river." "Canada. That's a laugh." "And then what?" "The river?" "No. Yes, I have to scout it, and while I'm throwing away all the spice." "Marius, how do you think that will look?" "It's dark, no one will see." "That's exactly when they're looking for someone like you going to the river to incriminate themselves." "I'm liable to be hanged for it, Zaynora. They have me for hoarding and distributing. Both of us, but we have tickets out. I'm just giving the man the last 2 bells, and he will transferry them himself. We'll take his horse on a steamship to Canada. You, the cats, and me. The horse. I gave my word, my love." Chapter 4. Hyperbjornia and Antjornia. Bjorn equals bear and Bjork equals birch tree. That's the way London Jack heard it all right. The Great Bjorn in the North Tornsby. London Jack figured that the penguins had long since migrated away from the bear to Antjornia. The Hyperborea the Mediterraneans knew about, London Jack thought. Was this Jornia? Above, what great river? This England had rivers, and there are rivers somewhere north too. Lefty mentioned Canada again, but he thought over that whole enterprise. It had a natural progression, an arc. On the other hoof, he considered his debt paid and Lefty could make off in Canada by himself, one hand and all. Then again, there were graves in Scotland as well as Canada. Then he thought about after leaving Lefty and if he would miss him. He looked over at him. He did take care to brush, feed, and water him. The only difference between a horse and a dog is a horse lets the man know it's just a job. The dog yearns desperately for friendship, a morbid equanimity to be used in such a way that was at the cost of one's dignity, self-respect, and physical health. London Jack wouldn't act that way for Lefty or anyone, although he wished he was a dog some days, so he could be nearer to Trinity. But we are what we are, thought London Jack. How a rat? How a whale? A dog? A horse lets man know it's just a job because this companionship becomes abusive in the form of neglect as much as direct harm. London Jack knew the world, and he knew man, and he knew what was in the heart of man, even though he did think Lefty was a good man in many ways. He only would indulge in the nostalgia of Trinity and not make anything of his future with Lefty. He was too afraid of getting let down again. He had a Trinity-sized hole in his horse heart, and he couldn't allow it to get bigger. He thought he should keep it the same size in case she ever came back. Lefty could sense when London Jack wanted to be left alone. That horse has a melancholy liver at times, he said aloud. London Jack basically agreed and didn't hold it against Lefty. Soon Lefty began to talk to himself as if he was a professor of history at the university of wherever they were, dancing in circles around the tomb of Cyrus the Great, the man who did build the second temple, the Persian, the temple that Jesus knew, Cyrus the Persian. Let's allow him his plot of land. There'd be no Persia without the Medes, London Jack. London Jack smiled, but he didn't say anything. The Assyrian fought but a few minor raids into the land of the Medes. Lefty paused for effect, receiving few horses for their effort. London Jack thought of the great horses of men. What was the name of Cyrus' horse? The great Nicaean horse of the past that hunted. The horse of Darius was also a Nicaean that saw the great Bucephalus. And where was the tomb of Bucephalus? The ox-headed one? Was it better for a horse to have the heads of lions or the heads of oxen? London Jack pondered. But he thought horses should just have horse heads. London Jack wondered if Lefty would be remembered by history. Their escape was infamous, no doubt. He was a resourceful man for getting out of prison with one hand, but he used that to his advantage, didn't he? Got locked up in the infirmary when he knew there was going to be a riot. Well above that he wore careful, deliberate, measured, respectable, respectful, earnest, distant sometimes, jovial sometimes, ate to his fill, but would still be considered quite thin, a runner as a young man. Unmovable once decided upon a path and usually right, walks circumspectly, liberal, egalitarian, prayed before meals as a boy, doesn't go to church, but has since his freedom served the church every day on this mission of preserving their bells, which would get him thrown into prison. Easily, and it's amazing it hasn't happened already. As the barge glided down the canal, London Jack's thoughts went to Trinity. She had a parable about the eagle and the crow. The crow was jealous of the eagle and would even dare to pluck its feathers. When there are a few crows, they will harass the eagle together for as long as the eagle stays at their level. The crows will even be so bold to jump on the back of the eagle. The eagle in turn wants to fight back, but it cannot handle 3 or 4 crows pursuing it. The eagle can only fly higher to where the crows cannot reach. But how would the penguins escape crow? Now London Jack felt like a Macedonian ox amongst Grecian urns. The day was full on its side, noon that is. After they reached the next town, they reached the harbor and could unload the bells with a tackle and pulley by the docks. The next town was called Corby according to Lefty, but the harbor warrant in Corby no more. Corby Harbor was actually next to Corby on account of some story. As our two heroes came through the hills to the main source river, they heard explosions. Then they saw the marks of industry. When they got to the river's ledge, they could see the landscape across dotted with machines and fences and roads. The earth lay open in a maze of a descending pit that great plumes of steam and gases escaped upwards from with loud hissing and moans as if they were the cries of lost souls. The whole place was horrendous. Far in the distance, they saw long infinite lines of marching penguins, each carrying a mining implement of some kind. The penguins seemed to be working themselves very orderly up and down the spiraling myriad of pyramid-stir steps into the quarry. With the different colors of the leftover rubble stones they had quarried, the penguins had made a mosaic to Joseph Stalin upon the hills. Stalinists and stonemasons to boot, these quarrymen penguins really had stripped the earth of any semblance of its idyllic nature. Lefty and London Jack were glad to be away from that scene as they came to the docks to unload their pig iron, as it were, though they did have a fair bit of that and all. But soon as they could get the local blacksmith, who was a smuggler for the church, they brought up the iron and the brass. They were that much closer to being through with their bell chasing. Yes, everything wore a rat, but it don't matter what you wore, it matters what you're going to be. Lefty concluded some bygone thought from ages past. Even penguins wore rats. London Jack thought about the penguins and this Lord Crow. He had read his poetry in the London Times recently, and it never impressed him. He didn't even consider the man a lunatic, though his devotion to the moon was unquestionable. But then people questioned him because he forced his hand into asking inane questions. It was nearing the end of April, and the penguins had continually worked in the dark where it was winter, but now they were beginning to have conversations where the light broke through the ventilation shafts, where it wore summer. The newspapers had been smuggled in, and they thought it was quite odd that there were never mention of this Britannium they were mining or their efforts. Surely, they were employed by the Prime Minister and should be recognized for helping society. When they asked simple questions, the security around the mines tightened. The government's paprika tariffs on paprika had also come to harm the penguins, for the countries with these spices also had the higher quality of fish. But now they were only getting the fish in Crow Bay. It tasted like mud. They shut down the mines for a day as they went to bargain with Lord Crow himself. They all sat out in his yard and just began to chat, their voice incessant, ongoing. Crow couldn't concentrate on his moon to write yet another poem. He didn't dare leave for the Kubrick beaches. He gave into negotiations and lost his mystery in the process. He had to call the sinister Prime Minister. These Stalinists of yours want me to dredge the entire bay as some sort of restoration, so they can get better quality of fish, Crow complained over the phone. Dredge the bay, old man, Hogg said. We have nothing to worry about. Have you seen the latest pass in Parliament? The hangings, Crow muttered. Yes, we brought them back, for terrorists you see. But only foreign terrorists, Hogg boasted. Sir, the dredgings is what we need to be talking about. Oh yes, well extended as an olive branch to one of those greenies. Tell them to go clean up Crow Bay. And so, they began to dredge up the bay and pick stones away from the old riverbed and dig a canal. The townsfolk were hired to dig a giant ditch, penny a day, but also a loaf of bread, 16-ounce tobacco, 5 beers, block of cheese, cigarettes, beer. This got the Stalinists back to work, but they noticed they never got such treatment. The idea of a clean water project and a new canal sounded like a promising future and even generational jobs, but all the waste from these projects went into their housing quarters. And so they but sharpened their beaks for that night. As Crow readied his quill one night, and his inkwell under his arm, he set out for the Kubrick beaches to write another inane poem about the moon. He returned to his yard to see his yard light was not on, and only the moon shone. He heard a rustling, and then, in the shadows of the cypress trees, a baby rabbit ran up. It was darting away from a murder of crows pecking at its legs and vulnerable belly. The mother rabbit ran also out to try and save her young, but it was taken away screaming in the air. Dreadful, dreadful, muttered Crow. What a veritable thing to do. Then it were as the woods around his home did grow legs and choke around his mansion. The shadows gripped his estate as the penguins secretly crept unto his property. As Crow came to the landing of his home, he thought it queer that Brunton had not met him. The devil is that man? The yard light can't be out, Crow muttered as he searched for his keys. In an instant the penguins were upon him. They used their beaks like the daggers of the senators. Stalinists. That night Lefty was telling London Jack how they were going to trade the next set of bells. You're going to go with this couple from Paisley, London Jack, Lefty said. It's the end of our travels, but you'll go on for more, many more. That's the last of me too. Think I'll retire to Scotland. They'd never bother coming all the way up there. Well, I hope you'll enjoy Canada. London Jack went to bed that night and had a dream he woke up and was back in the outdoor stables in Millbank Prison next to another horse chewing at its front leg in a wooden splint. The quarter-hour bells began ringing somewhere. 2 men approached and went to the horse with the wooden splint. All right, Waleed Fred, said the guard. We got to help stand up Lefty here for the day. Which one, sir? The one with its leg in a splint. Old London Jack will get up on his own accord. London Jack lazily looked around with his large, soft, beautiful horse eyes. Across the way, he saw a giant white pig in a pen and a crow perched atop a roof with coxcomb shingles. The rest he must have imagined. London Jack lazily looked around with his large, soft, beautiful horse eyes. Across the way, he saw a giant white pig in a pen and a crow perched atop a roof with coxcomb shingles. The rest he must have imagined.